The scanner at border station Calvary 9 ran its sweep every 40 seconds, the same sweep it had been running for 11 years. And on the 431st sweep of the night watch, it returned a contact that made Officer Second Class Yena Voss sit up straight in her chair and read the data twice before she said anything. She said, "Petrov, come look at this." Officer Third Class Petrov was at the adjacent station, running the standard communications monitoring that was the other half of their night watch duties, and he came over and looked at her display and said, "Navigation error. Some human freighter that didn't check its charts." She said, "Look at the trajectory analysis." He looked at the trajectory analysis. She said, "That ship has been on this exact heading for 6 hours. It crossed the border at 200 and it has not deviated by 1 degree since." She pulled up the identification data. "It's a destroyer. UES Iron Meridian, human military vessel." Petrov looked at the data. He said, "That's not a navigation error." She said, "No, it's not." She sent the alert up the chain. On the bridge of the Iron Meridian, nobody said anything. That was the thing about a crew that had been together long enough. They knew when talking was useful, and they knew when it wasn't. And right now talking wasn't. And so 31 people sat at their stations in the specific alert silence of professionals doing a job that required everything they had. And they did it without discussing whether they were doing it, because the discussion had happened 3 weeks ago, and the decision had been made, and here they were. Captain Cole Ryder sat at the command console. He was 44 years old and had the face of a man who had been making hard decisions for 20 years and had found a way to live with most of them. Not all of them. Most. The ones he hadn't found a way to live with had settled into a specific weight that he carried the way you carried things you had decided not to put down. He looked at the navigation display. Harmon's Ridge, 40,000 civilians, 14 hours at current speed. He looked at the tactical display. Clean, no contacts yet. Lieutenant Mara Voss was at the tactical station. 29 years old. The best targeting specialist in the 3rd Fleet by formal assessment, and in Ryder's informal assessment, the best he had ever seen, which was a different kind of best. She was running a continuous threat assessment that updated every 15 seconds, and had been doing it since they crossed the border and had not said anything about the results because the results were what they were, and saying them out loud would not change them. Master Chief Dex Okafor's voice came up from engineering. "Ship is running clean, Captain. All systems green. She's happy." Ryder said, "Keep her happy, Dex." Okafor said, "Always do." Ryder looked at the navigation display again. He said nothing. He kept going. He went to his quarters at 800 for 10 minutes. Not because he needed sleep. He had stopped sleeping properly 3 weeks ago and had made his peace with that. But because there was something he needed to do before the day got further into itself, and the doing of it required 10 minutes of privacy. He sat at the small desk and opened his personal console. The message was there. It had been there for 3 weeks and he had read it every day, and today was no different. Danny's voice, 16 years old. The voice of a boy trying to sound steady who was not entirely succeeding and didn't know his father could hear that and wouldn't have been embarrassed if he had known, because Danny was the kind of person who understood that being scared and trying to be steady were not mutually exclusive. He said, "Dad, they're building something on the ridge above town. It looks like a weapons platform. I looked it up and the configuration matches Calvary military construction specs. I found the specs online. Everyone here is scared. Mom says it might be nothing, but she doesn't believe it, I can tell. Are you coming?" 3 weeks old. Ryder closed the message. He sat at the desk for a moment. Then he went back to the bridge. Admiral Khan received the alert at 6:14 and read it twice, and then looked at his fleet deployment display with the expression of a man who had been given a problem so small relative to his available resources that the problem was almost insulting. 200 ships in the Kelvari Third Border Fleet, the finest force in the Empire's Sector Command. Veth Khan had commanded it for 8 years, and in those 8 years had conducted 11 enforcement actions, 6 territorial negotiations, and 2 full military engagements, all of them concluding with outcomes that had satisfied the Empire's requirements and enhanced his own reputation, which was also satisfying. One human destroyer. He looked at the contact data. UES Iron Meridian, a destroyer, which was a class of vessel that Khan's intelligence files described as capable and fast, but fundamentally a single-ship platform without the mass or firepower to represent a serious threat to a fleet of any significant size. His fleet was 200 ships. His fleet was 200 ships, and one human destroyer had crossed his border. He said, send 6 ships to intercept, escort the vessel back to the border. His staff acknowledged. He went back to his morning briefing. Fleet Commander Dara Sen went to his office before the escort ships had finished forming up. She was 37 years old and had been Khan's second in command for 3 years, which was long enough to understand him well and long enough to understand when understanding him was not going to be useful. She had studied human military history specifically and extensively for 4 years at the Imperial War College, which was not typical for officers of her rank, and which had produced a body of knowledge that she had found professionally valuable in several situations, and that she was finding professionally urgent in this one. She said, Admiral, may I have a moment? He said, make it brief. She said, the human vessel, one destroyer, crossing our border on a direct heading, moving at standard cruise speed. No evasive action, no weapons powered, no attempt to disguise its presence. He said, I'm aware, 6 ships are intercepting. She said, Admiral, I've studied human military doctrine extensively. A single human vessel crossing a hostile border deliberately and openly is not a navigation error, and it is not an act of desperation. She said, it is bait. He looked at her. He said, bait for what? She said, for us to do something. Something that becomes part of a record. Something that justifies what comes after it. She said, Admiral, I think that ship is broadcasting everything that happens to it on open frequencies. I think it crossed our border specifically so we would respond, and the response would be documented, and the documentation would be used. He said, used how? She said, that depends on what we do. If we fire on it, we have documented ourselves attacking a human military vessel in what the humans will characterize as an unprovoked engagement. If we escort it out, we have documented ourselves acknowledging that it was in our territory conducting some kind of mission, and we responded by removing it, which raises questions about why it was here and what we're doing at the colony. Khan looked at her for a moment. He said, we escort it back across the border. We issue a formal protest. We note the violation in the official record, and the matter is concluded. She said, Admiral, what is the ship's heading? He said, Harmon's Ridge Colony. She said, and what is at Harmon's Ridge? He said, a human civilian settlement. She said, and above Harmon's Ridge. A pause. He said, the military installations are a standard border security measure. They are entirely within Empire territorial rights. She said, yes, but they are not documented as such through any official process because the Empire has been careful to conduct this particular border security measure quietly. She said, that ship going to Harmon's Ridge makes it not quiet. He looked at her. He said, Fleet Commander, 6 ships are intercepting. The human vessel will be escorted out. The matter will be concluded. Return to your duties. She looked at him for a moment. She said, yes, Admiral. She went back to her station. She pulled up the Iron Meridian's trajectory and calculated its current position and its heading and the speed at which the intercept ships were closing. And she ran the numbers on what was going to happen in the next 6 hours, and the numbers were not numbers she wanted to be running. She began composing a formal descent for the record. The 6 Kelvari ships formed up around the Iron Meridian at 900. They came in from 3 angles, organized and professional. The standard intercept formation for a vessel of the Meridian's class, and they matched its speed and surrounded it with the practiced ease of a fleet that had conducted this kind of enforcement action many times. The lead ship opened a channel. The voice that came through was official and clipped, the voice of someone who had done this before and considered it administrative rather than military. It said, "Human vessel, you are in violation of Kelvari Empire territorial boundaries. This is your first warning. Power down propulsion and prepare to be escorted back across the border. You will not be harmed if you comply immediately." Ryder looked at the channel indicator. He opened the return channel. He said, "I'm aware of my position. I'm continuing on my current heading." The Kelvari commander said, "That is not an option available to you." Ryder said, "I know." He closed the channel. He looked at Mara. She was already at the tactical console, her hands moving through the targeting interface with the precise economy of motion that she brought to everything tactical, building something, updating something, running calculations that she had probably started 3 hours ago. She said, "I have solutions on all 6, Captain, on your order." He said, "Not yet, keep them updated." She said, "Yes, sir." The Iron Meridian kept going. The 6 Kelvari ships kept pace. At 9:40, Ryder called Mara and Akafer to the bridge command area. The 3 of them stood at the central console with the tactical display between them, and Ryder told them what he had not told them before because before they hadn't needed it, and now they did. He said, "Harmon's Ridge, 40,000 civilians, my wife is there, my son Danny is there." He said it plainly, the way he said things that were important without softening them. He said the Kelvari have been building military installations on the ridge above the colony for 6 months, not officially. No declaration of intent, no formal territorial claim, no documentation. Quiet. Installation by installation, quietly. And in 3 weeks those installations will be fully operational, and there will be a weapons perimeter around 40,000 people with no way through it. Akafer looked at him, said nothing. Mara said, "And nobody in the fleet acted because, without official documentation, there was no official violation." Ryder said, "Correct. Nothing official has happened. Everything is quiet." He said, "I crossed the border to make something happen that isn't quiet." He looked at the tactical display. "Every move they make responding to us goes on the open emergency frequency. Every ship in this sector is picking it up. The whole sector is watching what the Kelvari do with one human destroyer that crossed their border on a heading toward a civilian colony." Mara said, "And if they fire on us?" He said, "Then the whole sector watches the Kelvari fire on a human military vessel that was heading toward a civilian colony, and the quiet is over." She said, "And if they don't fire and just keep escorting?" He said, "Then we reach the colony, and the whole sector watches us reach it, and the quiet is over a different way." Akafer said, "In us, Captain, what happens to us?" Ryder said, "We do our job until we can't." A pause. Akafer said, "I can keep her running a good while past the point where she should stop running." Mara said, "I can keep the guns going past the point where the numbers say I should stop." Ryder looked at both of them. He said, "I know." He said it the way he said things he meant completely and couldn't add to. They went back to their stations. At 1100, Khan escalated. 6 ships had been matching the Iron Meridian's pace for 2 hours, and the Iron Meridian had not changed course by 1 degree and was making steady progress toward Harmon's Ridge. And this was not the outcome Khan had anticipated when he sent 6 ships, which was the problem with sending 6 ships to do what he had thought was a simple administrative task. He sent 20. They formed a wall directly in the Iron Meridian's path, which was the formation used when you wanted to communicate that there was no path. The wall was solid, and the ships in it were heavier than the 6 intercept ships, and the message was as clear as military formations ever got. The lead ship broadcast, "This is your final warning, human vessel. Stop immediately or we will fire." The Iron Meridian did not stop. Khan watched on his tactical display. He said, "Warning shot, across the bow." His gunnery officer said, "Aye, Admiral." The shot fired. The shot hit closer than warning shots hit. That was the first thing Mara said after it landed. Not the damage report, the analysis. She had the shot trajectory on her display before the shockwave had finished moving through the ship's hull, and she said, "That wasn't a warning, Captain. That was a ranging shot. They're zeroing targeting solutions." The ship rocked. The hit was to the port side, glancing hull stress along the forward section. Damage alerts lit up the engineering display, and Akafar's voice came up immediately. "Forward hull stress minor. I've got it." And the alerts started clearing before Ryder had finished reading them. He said, "Are we broadcasting?" His communications officer, Ensign Park, said, "Everything, sir. All frequencies. Emergency band, military band, civilian channels. Every ship in range is receiving our feed." Ryder said, "Good." He opened a channel. Not to the Kelvari fleet. He opened the general emergency frequency, the one that went everywhere, the one that any ship within range picked up automatically, because it was the frequency that broadcast when something was happening that anyone nearby needed to know about. He said, "This is Captain Cole Ryder of the UES Iron Meridian. I am currently inside Kelvari Empire territory on a heading toward the human civilian colony of Harmon's Ridge. I have been fired upon by elements of the Kelvari 3rd Border Fleet. I am continuing on my current heading." He released the channel. He said, "Mara, now." She had been ready for 40 minutes. She fired in sequence. The sequence she had built over 2 hours of watching 20 ships hold a wall formation. The sequence that addressed each ship's critical systems in the order that produced maximum effect in minimum time. She fired 12 times in 11 seconds. 17 of 20 ships lost propulsion simultaneously. The drive simply stopped, not destroyed, disabled. The specific systems that made 17 ships a coordinated wall converted into 17 ships that were drifting, and would spend the next several hours being recovered by Khan's fleet, and would not be a factor in anything that happened in that time. The remaining 3 scattered. The gap in the wall was large and clean, and the Iron Meridian went through it at 108% drive output, because Akafar had quietly been pushing the engines since the ranging shot landed, and had not asked for permission, because he had served with Ryder long enough to know that permission was implicit. The wall was gone. The Iron Meridian kept going. Khan stood at the tactical display and looked at 17 disabled ships and 1 human destroyer that had just gone through his wall like his wall had not existed. He said, "How?" Sen said she had solutions on all 20 before she fired, Admiral. She built them over 2 hours while we were matching their pace. She said it without inflection because she had said what needed saying before, and it hadn't been heard, and she was not going to perform "I told you so." She said the solutions were already complete when they gave us the ranging signal. She was waiting for the order. Khan said, "One tactical officer did that." Sen said, "Yes." He said, "In 11 seconds." She said, 12. He looked at the display, the Iron Meridian's position marker moving steadily toward Harmon's Ridge. 12 hours. He said, "Send 50 ships, full combat speed, destroy it." She said, "Admiral." He said, "I said destroy it." She said, "Admiral, that ship has been broadcasting on open emergency frequency since it crossed our border. Everything we have done in the past 2 hours is on record and has been received by every ship in this sector." He looked at her. She said if we destroy that ship, the broadcast record of this engagement goes to every receiving station simultaneously. Everything we have done. The intercept, the wall, the ranging shot. She said our response to one human destroyer heading toward a civilian colony, all of it on record, all of it already received. He said then we stop the broadcast, we jam their signal. She said we can't jam it without destroying the ship, and destroying the ship creates more record. She said it patiently because it was important he understand it, and he needed to hear it clearly. Admiral. The broadcast has already been going for 2 hours. The record exists. The sector has it. He looked at the display. He said, then we catch it and escort it out, and we characterize the entire incident as a navigation error and a miscommunication. She said we can't. He said why not? She said because of the colony. She said if we escort that ship out and characterize this as a navigation error, we have acknowledged on record that there is nothing at Harmon's Ridge worth conducting an armed response over. We cannot then continue construction on the installations above Harmon's Ridge. If we do, the record of this incident will be used to characterize the construction as a response to the incident rather than a pre-existing security measure. Khan said nothing. Sen said, Admiral, we have been doing something quietly for 6 months. That ship crossed our border to make it not quiet. And we sent 6 ships and then 20 ships and fired a ranging shot, and the not quiet is on record in this sector. She said, the 50 ships you just sent will make it louder. He slammed his hand on the console edge. The sound of it was sharp in the quiet of the flag bridge. He said 50 ships, full combat speed. I want that vessel disabled and boarded. We take the crew and we have the record and we control the record. She looked at him. She said, yes, Admiral. She gave the order. She went back to her station and she updated her formal descent. 50 ships. Ryder watched them come up on the long-range sensors at 1200, and he looked at the numbers, and he looked at the Iron Meridian's current position and current speed, and he did the math in his head, and the math said they would intercept approximately 4 hours from Harmon's Ridge. He said, HFY. HFY said, Captain. He said, I need more. HFY said, she's at 108%. He said, I need more than 108. A pause. HFY said she'll hold, might hurt her later. Ryder said, how much later? HFY said, dockyard kind of later, 3 months minimum. Ryder said, push her. HFY said, aye, Captain. The engines went to 114%. Ryder looked at Mara. She was already updating her targeting solutions on the incoming 50 ships, building the new picture, identifying priorities in the formation, working through the problem the way she worked through all problems, which was methodically and without apparent emotion about the difficulty of what she was doing. She said, I can give you sustained fire on approximately 20 of the 50 before they get positioning on us. After that, it gets complicated. He said, make the 20 count. She said, always do. He looked at the navigation display. Harmon's Ridge. 12 hours at original speed. Now 10 at 114%. The 50 ships coming in behind would close the gap somewhere around hour 6. 4 hours of running with 50 ships on them. He thought about Danny. He did not open the message. He did not need to. He had read it enough times that he did not need to open it, which was its own kind of thing. He said, Park, make sure the broadcast is clean, everything crisp. Park said, clean and strong, sir. Clear signal on all channels. He said, good. Log our current position and heading for the record. Park logged it. Ryder looked at the stars through the forward viewport. He kept going. The first hour of the chase was the cleanest. 50 Kelvari ships behind them. The Iron Meridian ahead. The gap was wide enough that the trailing ships couldn't get effective firing solutions, and the Meridian could maintain speed without evasive action. Mara used the hour to refine her targeting solutions on the trailing fleet. She did it with the patient focus of someone building something that needed to be exactly right before it was used, checking and rechecking, updating as the 50 ships' formation shifted, identifying the ships in the formation whose drive systems were most exposed at this angle of pursuit. She said, "Captain, when they close to firing range, I recommend we don't run straight." He said, "Agreed. What pattern?" She pulled up a display. She said, "I've been working on this since we crossed the border. Standard evasive patterns are on file and Kelvari Tactical Doctrine has countermeasures for all of them." She said, "This isn't standard." She showed him. It was a specific sequence of heading changes, each one responding to the previous one in a way that looked reactive but was actually planned, each step building a geometry relative to the pursuing fleet that opened firing angles for the Meridian while closing them for the pursuit. He looked at it. He said, "You wrote this 3 weeks ago." She said, "I had time to think on the transit out." He said, "Use it." She said, "Yes, sir." At hour 2, the gap closed enough for ranging shots. The first one hit the aft shield array. The array held. Akafer's voice from engineering, shields holding, minor power fluctuation, "I've got it." The second shot missed by 30 meters because Mara had started running her pattern, and the pattern moved the ship 2 seconds before the solution that would have hit it was fired. Ryder said, "Mara." She said, "Not yet, I want them closer." He said, "Closer means more hits." She said, "Closer means better solutions. I want solutions I don't have to try twice." He said, "Your call." She said, "Yes, sir." 3 more shots landed in the next 20 minutes. 2 of them hit. The port shield array dropped to 70%. A power conduit in Section 5 shorted, and Akafer had a team on it in 90 seconds, and it was back at partial capacity in 4 minutes. The bridge took a secondary shockwave from a near miss that threw Ryder sideways in the command chair, and he grabbed the console and pulled himself back. He said, "Status." Park said, "Still broadcasting, sir. Clean signal." He said, "Good." Mara said, "Now." She fired. She fired at a sustained rate that she maintained for 40 seconds, the solutions coming off her targeting system in the sequence she had built, each shot placed where it needed to be placed for the effect she needed it to have. Not destruction, disabling. The Kelvari ships in her solutions didn't explode. Their drives stopped. Their weapons arrays went offline. They drifted out of formation and became obstacles for the ships behind them rather than active pursuers. 31 ships disabled in 40 seconds. 19 still active. Ryder said, "Good shooting." Mara said, "I know." She was already updating for the 19. Her hands were moving continuously over the targeting interface. She said, "The 19 are repositioning. They're trying to split the formation." He said, "Webb, execute pattern Delta." Helm Officer Webb said, "Aye." The Iron Meridian turned, not away from the pursuing ships but at an angle to them, the specific angle that Mara's pattern required to open the shots she needed. And the movement was smooth because Webb had been flying this ship for 6 years and knew what it needed before it asked. The hit that caught the bridge came at hour 4. Not a glancing blow. A direct hit to the upper port section of the bridge. One of the 19 active pursuers getting a clean solution in the 2 seconds between pattern steps when the Meridian was on a predictable vector. The hit blew out 2 secondary consoles, killed the auxiliary communications array, started a fire in the ceiling that the suppression system put out in 8 seconds, and threw Ryder from the command console hard enough that he hit the floor and stayed there for 3 seconds before he got up. He got up. There was blood from somewhere above his left eye. He put his hand on it, pulled his hand away, looked at it, put the hand back and kept it there and went back to the command console. He said, "Status." Park said, "Primary broadcast still running, sir. We lost the aux array but primary is clean." Akafor said hull breach in Section 3, automated containment engaged. Section 7 has a slow breach I'm patching manually. She's still running. Mara said port shields at 40%. I have solutions on 9 of the remaining active ships. She said it without looking up from her console. 3 of the 9 are in positions where my solutions take 2 of them out simultaneously. He said take the shots. She said taking. 6 shots. 7 seconds. 9 ships became 2 and then 1 and then 0 active pursuers as the last one took 2 simultaneous hits to its drive system and dropped out of pursuit. Ryder looked at the sensor display. 50 ships. 49 disabled or destroyed or fallen behind. One that had managed to stay with them but was now decelerating because it had taken enough hits that staying with the Meridian at this speed was asking more than it had to give. He looked at the navigation display. Harmon's Ridge. 1 hour. He said, Akafor, what do we have? Akafor said, she's running, Captain. 111%. I had to back her off because something in the secondary coupling is making a sound I don't like. She'll hold another 2 hours, maybe 3. Ryder said, she only needs to hold 1. Akafor said she'll hold 1. Ryder sat in the command chair with his hand on his head and blood on his fingers and looked at the navigation display. 1 hour. He looked at the display for a while. Then he reached into his console and opened Danny's message. He did not play it, he just looked at the file. The date stamp, 3 weeks ago, the voice in it that was 16 years old and trying to be steady. He closed it. He kept his hand on his head, and he watched the navigation display, and he did not say anything. At 50 minutes out, the long-range sensors showed him what had happened at Harmon's Ridge. He looked at the reading for a moment before he understood what he was looking at. Mara said, Captain, look at the long range. He was already looking. 43 contacts. New contacts between the Iron Meridian and Harmon's Ridge. Civilian configurations, cargo ships, transport vessels, the drive signatures of mining equipment, the specific readings of vehicles that had been built for purposes other than space travel and were making the best of the situation. 43 of them, arranged in a line. Between the Meridian and the colony. Between the colony and anything that might be following the Meridian. No weapons, nothing military about any of them. 40,000 people's worth of vehicles, everything the colony had that could fly, launched, and positioned in a line between the Iron Meridian and the Kelvari fleet. Ryder looked at the reading. Mara said, they've been watching the broadcast, sir. He said, I see that. She said, all 6 hours of it. He said, I see that. She said, they came out to meet us. He said, yes. He looked at the line of 43 civilian vessels on his display. Cargo haulers and mining shuttles and medical transports and private craft that had no business being in space in a military situation, and were there anyway because 40,000 people had watched a single human warship come through Kelvari space for 6 hours, and had decided that if it was coming to reach them, the least they could do was come out to meet it. He looked at the reading for a long time. He said, Park, are the Kelvari ships seeing what we're seeing? Park said, they're on the same sensor range, sir. Yes. He said, and they're still recording. Park said, everything's on record, sir. He said, good. On the Kelvari flagship, Khan looked at his display. 43 civilian vessels. Between his remaining active ships and Harmon's Ridge. He looked at them for a long time. He looked at the broadcast record that had been running for 6 hours, and was still running and had been received by every ship in the sector, and was going to be received by every station those ships could reach. He looked at the 43 civilian ships. Sen stood beside him. She did not say anything because she had said what needed saying, and none of it had been heard, and she was not going to add to a record that was already long enough by saying, I told you. She waited. He said, if we fire through them. She said, yes. He said, the broadcast. She said, yes. He said, we cannot fire through civilians on record. She said, no. He looked at the display for a long time. He said, and if we don't fire? She said, then the Iron Meridian reaches the colony, and the record shows us pursuing a single human vessel for 6 hours, firing on it, failing to stop it, and then being stopped by 43 civilian ships that we wouldn't fire through. She said, the record shows us trying to stop a human warship heading toward a human colony and failing because the colony's civilians came out to stand between us and them. He said, and the installations on the ridge. She said, the record of this engagement makes the installations unjustifiable. We cannot continue construction on military platforms above a civilian colony when we have just demonstrated on record that the colony is significant enough to warrant a 6-hour pursuit engagement. He was quiet for a moment. She said, Admiral, there was a moment 6 hours ago when the human captain opened that channel for the first time when the correct response was to do nothing, to not intercept, to let the ship proceed and then make a formal diplomatic protest. She said it carefully, not to wound him but because it was true and the record needed it. If we had done nothing, this ship would have reached the colony and the galaxy would have seen a human military vessel enter Kelvari territory and reach a human colony. Minor incident. Manageable. She said, instead the galaxy has seen us pursue, fire on, and fail to stop that ship, and has now seen 43 civilian vessels stop us by simply being present. Khan looked at the 43 civilian vessels on his display. He said, the ship came here specifically to make us do this. She said, yes. He said, and we did it. She said, yes. He sat at the tactical console for a long time. He said, withdraw the fleet. She said, Admiral. He said, and issue the decommission order for the Ridge installations. She said, sir. He said, all of them. Complete decommission. File the documentation with the Assembly. Official record that the Empire has no military presence at Harmon's Ridge. She looked at him. He said, Fleet Commander, give the orders. She said, yes, Admiral. The Iron Meridian passed through the line of civilian vessels at 1847 hours. They came through slowly because they could afford to come through slowly now, and also because the ship was running at 111% on a secondary coupling that Akafar said was making a sound he didn't like, and slow was better for the coupling. The 43 civilian vessels held their positions as the Meridian passed between them, and Ryder looked at them through the viewport, the cargo haulers and the mining equipment and the medical shuttles and the private craft, and he thought about 40,000 people deciding all at once that this was what you did. The colony was visible from the viewport now. Not the settlement itself yet, but the planet, Harmon's Ridge below, the specific coloring of it, the ridge that gave it its name visible even from this altitude as a darker line across the surface. He opened the colony frequency. He said, Harmon's Ridge, this is the Iron Meridian, we're here. A voice came back immediately, a woman's voice, official but not composed. The composed was doing some work but not quite holding. The colony administrator. She said, we see you, Captain. We've been watching your broadcast for 6 hours. Everyone has been watching. He said, I know. She said, the whole sector has been watching. He said, I know. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, your son is standing right next to me. He's been standing here since the first alert 6 hours ago. He said you were coming. Ryder looked at the viewport. The planet below. He said, put him on. Danny's voice. 16 years old. He had been standing in the colony administrator's office for 6 hours watching a broadcast of his father's ship running through Kelvari space, and he had been saying to anyone who would listen that his father was coming, and when the connection opened he said, Dad. Ryder said, I'm here, Dan. Danny said, you came. Ryder said, I said I would. A pause. Danny said, the ship stopped. The Kelvari ship stopped. I'm watching the sensors and they've stopped and they're pulling back. Ryder said, I know. Danny said, why did they stop? Ryder said, because 40,000 people came out in cargo ships and mining equipment to stand between me and them. And nobody fires on 40,000 people when the whole sector is watching. Danny was quiet for a moment. Then he said, we didn't know if it would work. Coming out, some people said it was stupid. Ryder said it wasn't stupid. Danny said, we just thought, if you came all the way here then we should do something. We couldn't just watch. Ryder said, you did the right thing. Danny said, Dad, were you scared? Ryder looked at his console. The blood on his hand, dried now. The damage display showing hull breaches in sections 3 and 7, and the port shield array at 38%, and Akafer's notes on what the secondary coupling was going to need. He said, yes. Danny said, but you came anyway. Ryder said, that's what coming means. Danny was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Mom's here. She wants to talk to you. Ryder said, put her on. Akafer found Ryder at the viewport 20 minutes later. The channel with the colony was still open, but Ryder had handed it to Park and Park was handling the coordination of the docking approach. And Akafer had come up from engineering to tell Ryder personally what the secondary coupling was going to need, because some things you told the captain in person. He stood beside Ryder at the viewport. He said coupling is going to need full replacement, and the port shield array, and the Section 3 hull plating, that breach widened while we were running and the containment seal is holding but it's not happy. He said 3 months minimum in a dockyard, probably 4. Ryder said, I know. Akafer said, she ran good, Captain. Ryder said she did. Akafer said, she always runs good when she needs to. Ryder looked at the colony below. The settlement was visible now from this altitude, the buildings and the roads and the ridge behind them, and above the ridge where the Kelvari installations had been starting to appear on the scans there was nothing. The decommission order had gone out, and the equipment was already beginning to be withdrawn. He said, Dex, tell me about your kids. Akafer looked at him. He said, I got 4, 2 boys, 2 girls. Oldest is 26, youngest is 17. He said, I haven't seen them in 8 months. Ryder said, after the dockyard, I'll approve extended leave for the full crew. Akafer said, Captain, that's 4 months from now. Ryder said, I know. I'll approve it now so you can tell them. Akafer looked at the colony. He said, my youngest wants to be an engineer. She keeps sending me questions about the drives, and I keep sending her answers, and she keeps sending better questions. Ryder said, sounds like she'll be good at it. Akafer said, she'll be better than me. He said it with the specific pride of a man who genuinely wanted to be surpassed. She'll be better than me by a long way. They stood at the viewport for a while. Below them, the colony was what it had been before this morning, and what it would keep being, a settlement on a ridge, 40,000 people, buildings and roads, and the ordinary evidence of human life building itself somewhere new. Mara came up behind them. She stood beside Ryder at the viewport. She said, Kelvari fleet is at 100% withdrawal, all ships clearing our sensor range. He said, and the installations. She said, decommission order on record. Assembly notification filed by the Kelvari directly, which means they documented it themselves. It's on official record that those installations are gone, and the Empire has no military presence at Harmon's Ridge. He said, good. She said, sir, that was the plan right from the beginning. He said, yes. She said, the broadcast, making them respond on record, making them chase us so the whole sector saw them chase us. He said, yes. She said, and then the colony coming out. You planned for that too. He was quiet for a moment. He said, I hoped for that. I didn't plan for it. He looked at the colony below. You can't plan for 40,000 people deciding all at once what they're going to do. He said, you can just give them something worth deciding about. Myra looked at the colony. She said, were you sure it would work? He said, no. She said, but you came anyway. He said, yes. She looked at the viewport. She said, Park is ready for docking approach when you are, sir. He said, tell him 5 minutes. She went back to her station. Ryder looked at the colony for another minute. He looked at the ridge above it where the installations were coming down. He looked at the line of 43 civilian vessels still out there, the cargo haulers and mining equipment and medical shuttles slowly returning to the colony now that there was nothing between them and home that needed standing between. He reached into his console. He opened Danny's message. He looked at it for a moment. Then he closed it. He opened his log. He said, day of mission. Iron Meridian reached Harmon's Ridge Colony at 1847 hours. Mission parameters achieved. Kelvari fleet withdrawn. Ridge installations decommissioning on official record. He paused. Colony civilians launched 43 vessels to form voluntary perimeter between the Iron Meridian and pursuing Kelvari fleet. He paused again. He said, log note personal. I have served on 8 ships in 20 years. I have made decisions I will spend the rest of my life deciding whether they were right. He said, this one I know. He closed the log. He said, Park, begin docking approach. Park said, aye, Captain. The Iron Meridian began its approach to Harmon's Ridge. It came in trailing damage and running on a secondary coupling that Okafor was going to spend 3 months fixing, and with its port shield array at 38% and hull breaches in 2 sections, and 114% drive output, finally coming down to something the specs recognized. It came in with the 43 civilian vessels falling in around it, matching its speed, the specific geometry of a welcome. It came into the colony it had crossed Kelvari territory to reach, the colony whose people had come out in cargo ships and mining equipment to stand between it and the fleet behind it, the colony where a 16-year-old boy had been standing in the administrator's office for 6 hours telling anyone who would listen that his father was coming. It came in. It docked. Ryder stood up from the command console. He was going to go see his son.